Hey guys, Sebastian here with another Cardano update. This time I'm going over the April 12th technical report. So first things first, they're talking about the core. They're talking about how they're trying to refactor this to change around and fix up the part of the core code base. When they mean core code base, they don't actually mean like the central part of the code base. Like core code base actually means like a Cardano SL core. This is like one of the many different parts of the code base. Cardano core, the core component actually represents the following features mostly, which is like the basic definitions for various types. Like what is a coin, what is an address, what is a block header, what is an epoch, what is delegation. All these kinds of core definitions are in here. So when they say like a refactoring core code base, like I think probably what they mean is this part here. Given the fact that they've capitalized C with a capital letter, they mean core as in the component. And they're just talking about how they're developing a plan for how to go about refactoring this, and they should have a document ready. And I'm assuming this document is going to be internal, so we won't be able to see it, but we should see some activity in this part of the code base coming up. Next, we're talking about exchanges, onboarding, and support. So for that one, it's mostly talking about the documentation, sorry, not documentation, the V1 API with respect to exchanges. So as you know, if you've been following these videos, they've been working more and more on this wallet V1 version, which is a new version of their API with this new page you can go visit on the Cardano docs that shows you how to use this new API. They've been making documentation for exchanges for how to onboard onto this API if you want to use it. And they've been adding use cases to this API so that people can go look at the API, see how it's used, and all this kind of stuff. They've been gathering a lot of feedback on this API from a lot of people. This is like one of their main core items they're working on, and like this is what this is talking about. They repeat from last week, saying they're also trying to set up a Slack channel to talk with exchanges to try and figure out a way to communicate and make sure there are no problems. This next section is about the V1, like a core development. So the first one is task 2375, which is down here, which you saw in a previous week. I think, yeah, it was like 3 weeks ago. And they're talking about changing the node info response to be more flexible. So actually what they're saying here is that when you use the API, one of the APIs you have access to is to tell you about your client local time on your computer using NTP, which is the Network Time Protocol. And they essentially right now report not too much information, but as you know, there's been like a source of problems in the past, and so they changed this API to give a more flexible response. That way, in the future, they can add more data to this if they ever want to extend this API to add more information. And that's kind of what they're talking about here, which is why they say it needs to be reviewed after Network Time Protocol refactoring. That's to say, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Network Time Protocol has had some fair amount of refactoring recently to tackle some issues they had before, and this kind of just needs to be tied in together. Next up is 2398, which is writing up the integration tests. So the way integration tests work is that it's supposed to kind of like spin up the project and go through a use case scenario. So it's like not just testing a small functionality, it's supposed to test like from start to end of some predefined scenario, and then trying to get them to CI, which means continuous integration, which means every time they send off a new build or a new commit on their Git repository, it'll automatically trigger a run of the CI. And this is to help them like detect bugs early and avoid checking in bad code. If you're interested in setting this up yourself, you can go to the code, and they actually have some scripts that you can run somewhere down here. Yes, script as wall integration shell file that you can run, and it'll spin up this integration test for you if for some reason you want to run it yourself. So that's that. Next one is CSL 2400. So this one is not like a pull request, it's just like a task. This is to collect missing V1 endpoint data compared to V0 endpoints. So just to say, like I mentioned earlier, they've had an API before that was called V0, they have an API now called V1, and they're trying to make sure there's no difference between the two. I mean, obviously there's a difference, or else there'd be no point using the new version. But they're trying to make sure like it's compatible in an easy way, and that they didn't miss any features. There are no what we call regressions. So that's kind of what that's talking about. CSL 2405 also doesn't have any code for it as far as I know yet. But it's talking about adding a fees included option to transaction endpoint. So just whenever you send a transaction, I think the idea is in the API you could say like I want to send, you know, 1 ADA, and like the value you send is like you know, 1 minus transaction fee or something like that. I'm not exactly sure like what this is because there's no code for it, but it might be something like that. And they're saying it'll be completed from a design and implementation point in this sprint. That's to say like within this cycle. So I think IOHK is now trying to do like a monthly sprints, but I'm not too sure on that. But that's to say, if that is the case, because they're trying to do monthly releases, which means they're probably doing like a monthly sprints, then probably this means like it'll be done within a month. Next, they're talking about gathering feedback on the API. So this is something we've seen in the past. I don't think I have the tab open for that actually. But they ask people for feedback for the new version of the API, mostly from exchanges, and that's basically what this is. They gather feedback from people who used it, some suggestions, and they had like a previous checklist of some features. I showed you guys that in previous videos, and they're just saying they're continuing to gather more feedback and trying to improve on this. And yeah, this is like a very broad statement. It's like, you know, we're working on feedback and implementing it. It's like, okay, I don't really know, you know, what this feedback is. You're not giving me detail, but like we know that they're still working on the API v1 and they're still trying to fine tune it, I guess. They're saying that developers push to extend the section about reviewing transaction history to give more details about available filters. I also don't have any code for this. I think we'll see this possibly next week. So I think I remember they might have been doing something on the data side also for this, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, that's what that is. And also includes an effort to reward schema definitions of spending password and various months to reflect more on the actual semantic. That, you know, I'm also not sure what it is because there's no code for it. I'm assuming the spending password is when you add a password to your wallet. Therefore, people can open the wallet without a password, but they cannot send any money, is what I'm assuming this is. But until we get any code for this, there's no really way to know. We saw last week that they were doing the log file analyzer bug classification. I showed you guys one script they had for that last week. They also have a log classifier project on GitHub, like a whole project for this. I mean, it's not a large project, but it's like a separate project if you want to go check that out. That's to say, if you've ever hit into a bug on the wallet, there's a button to send your logs, and they're saying that they got a lot of logs, they need a way to filter this, so they have some classifier to help them, and it's like some sort of integration with Zendesk, which is the site they use for log handling, or like a log classification. And that's probably what they mean by the ticket classifier here. I'm assuming this is the tickets on Zendesk, which is the platform they use for handling these issues whenever they get new logs. Next, we're talking about working on block syncing. I haven't seen any pull requests on block syncing, so I'm not sure exactly what's happening. I mean, they did say they got preliminary results showing roughly 30% or 33% speed up, and also better memory performance. So actually we've seen something related to this in the past. So I think maybe like last month, maybe longer than that, I showed you guys a graph they put out on the GitHub that showed some of the performance with block streaming. So that graph's pretty old, so I'm not sure if it's still accurate, up to date. But if you're interested, you may be able to go back in history, try and find which video I posted that graph in, and like I fetch it out to get more insight. But you know, there's probably this text inside right here. It tells you like what the graph basically looks like. It's like a third speed up. You can imagine like one of them. If you imagine blocking from 0 to 100%, one of them's going like this, the other one's going like this. So that's basically what it looks like, I would assume. And that's it. Next up is actually I had some other stuff I want to mention myself, which is like I put in like a MISC API. Stuff that's not mentioned in the weekly report, but I want to add myself. One of them is they added like a more description of errors in the API. So it's like also probably according to feedback to make it easier to figure out what kind of errors happen and what they mean. They also added some new testing for the API. So what they noticed that sometimes someone will commit a change and would actually break the API. If you ever tried to use the API or like seen the documentation, you might have noticed this happen actually. We were like at sometimes like index.html or just like index slash or the URL kind of changed or whatever. So to avoid this in the future, they made a new test that looks for, I can pull up right here, this representation of the API. So you can see this is what the API looks like. Essentially, they're checking this file into the GitHub repository. That way, whenever they make a change to the API, it generates this text file, and they can compare and see if the text file has changed at all, and use that to see if they've made any bugs. So that's what that is, and that's what golden testing is, like a word to say like you have a true version of something. You're testing like, does your new version match the source of truth? And that's what they mean by like a golden test. There's this other thing where they're talking about migration of the docs from version 0 to version 1. So there's like another change to the exchange onboarding documentation where they're adding some more stuff. So if you read this documentation before, the exchange onboarding documentation again, you want to see the new up-to-date version. If you're interested, you can go check out now. There's going to be some new text for you to read, and it might help you get a better understanding if you're trying to launch an exchange. Next thing, before we get into Daedalus, this is another thing I want to add also. They added profiling instructions. If you want to like profile the speed and all this kind of stuff, I believe, of Cardano SL, they now have a documentation for how to set that up within this pull request. If you're interested, you can check that out. Alright, so Daedalus, they're talking about how they released the version 1.1.1, which had a hotfix for a bug. I mean, it had a few things, but mostly it was a hotfix for a bug with Asian languages. If you had a username with an Asian or non-line character in it, it would cause your wallet to fail to open up. So that was fixed. Next up, they're talking about Synchronous Wallet Restoration, which we've seen in the past, and I'll talk about that more later. But they're saying they're doing UI, UX improvements, which we'll see later. And they're also doing asynchronous wallet restoration. Actually, we can probably do the UI, UX improvements right now. If I can just go down here. So one of them is they added the version number in the application title. So you can see in the application title up here, they now show the version number. That's fine. They made another change where clicking outside of the dialog should not close it during wallet creation. So if you ever hit into this bug by accident, like now it's fixed and it's going to be in the next version. They changed the add wallet dialog in the wallet to open up inside the same page. It's another small fix or like change, I guess. If you want to look at more transactions, instead of opening up all your transactions at once, it now opens up only a few of them, and now you have like a show more transactions button at the bottom. So if you've like had any problems with like a large amount of transactions, maybe let's make it easier. I think I just saw that one. Okay, and yeah, before I get to that, I should also say they also added this other thing, which is like now when there's a new update available, it'll give you this prompt. It says like update and restart, postpone until later, and they've like changed the theme styling on the notification, so the color's like a bit different, and like the style's a bit different, and they also like made changes based on feedback from the community, which is honestly like it seems like this will be a huge change, but actually it's just like this small change right here. So it's like so if you're wondering, this is like a make directory, creates a directory, and this is like a copy. It copies a file. So I don't really know like what's up with this pull request title, but maybe it's like a work in progress. Maybe they'll add more stuff in the future. That's to say, last thing for the Daedalus release is that they're releasing a new version, the 0.10 release. That's going to be coming up, I believe, at the end of the month. You can find the list of all the changes in here. I believe the cutoff date for the 1.2.0 Cardano SL release has also passed. So all the features that will be included have already been merged. Now they're just doing testing for all this stuff. So that's pretty exciting. Alright, so back on track. Now we're talking about the wallet backend. So first we're talking about decommissioning the exchanges branch. So I mentioned this last week. This was the branch where exchanges were temporarily using to get around some problems the original version of the wallet had. So if you were around back in like January, you might remember some of these issues. If you weren't around back then it probably doesn't matter to you. And they're just giving me a bit of description as to what the problem was. But honestly, if you didn't develop this, like some compile flag unintentionally enabled, like if you weren't there back in January and you weren't a programmer, like this is not too important of a detail. Next up, the team also worked to write and validate formal specification of the new wallet backend. So this is something they've been working on for quite a while now, to remake the wallet backend based off a formal specification. So they're saying they're making more progress on that. Notably, you remember in previous weeks they made a change to the wallet spec relating to rollback. So I'll show you guys that briefly. And now they've fleshed it out in more detail, so they have a few work items related to this. So now they have like the actual some of the code for generating rollbacks in the Inductive Wallet. So if you're not sure what the Inductive Wallet is, this is a wallet for testing. The way it works is that, it kind of mentions here, so instead of blockchain, you have like a block trees, which is to test like a forking. So you can imagine in the Inductive Wallet, it's not real data. They generate fake data and create a fake blockchain. And they're testing scenarios like, okay, you create a fake blockchain over here. In the meantime, there's like another chain that spawns off like here. And then like the Inductive Wallet has to do a rollback so as to like go back down and like reapply a different branch. So it's kind of the testing they're doing. And this work in progress is a pull request that implements this feature that was laid out in the wallet specification. Yeah, they're also trying to do something like test infrastructure changes around this. They're also doing wallet spec for tracking metadata. So the wallet spec is like still moving along. You see, this is, if you haven't seen the spec I'm talking about, this is the spec right here. This is like a document. Anybody can go read it. It's the generic LaTeX document if you're interested. I mentioned earlier wallet restoration. We have a few things on here. So the first feature for a synchronous restoration of the wallet has been merged. And they also have different pull requests, which allows you to basically see your balance as the restoration is taking place. But you'll not be allowed to send any payments. So the way this works is when you're doing the async wallet restore, it'll focus on generating the UTXO first, which will allow you to see your balance, but it will not have synced the whole blockchain yet. So essentially, the way this is like made faster is that it will go fetch the UTXO. This is async. That is to say, not at the same time. It's not blocking. It's not like before. If you tried to restore in the past, you remember you would open the wallet and there'd just be like a restoration 5%, 10%, whatever at the bottom. This is not the case. Like it'll open up the wallet UI. That's why they mean async, and you can like use the UI and whatever, and you'll see the UTXO balance update. And at the same time, there'll be a different process that is updating the whole blockchain. That's what they're talking about here. So I think this will be like coming soon, because I think most of the code is done. The UI I think is also almost done. So this is like something that they're moving fast on, and hopefully everybody enjoys this feature once it's released. Next up, I talked to you guys about the metadata and history tracking. They're talking about a new data layer, which is to match the formal spec. That's to say, they're trying to essentially take the old wallet and like put in a separate location, and then put the new wallet somewhere else. So if you ever even seen their GitHub repository, they actually have a folder called wallet new. So it's like a clear separation between the two. And part of that is that they now have different kinds of wallets. And this is important for Ledger Wallet, for hardware wallets, this kind of stuff. I think I have it open somewhere down here. Yeah, but before I get into that, let me just like briefly take a sidestep to this other thing that's not mentioned in the report, which gives you more context. So they switched gears a bit to try and use object-oriented programming in the wallet spec. So if you know like a programming term, Haskell is like a functional programming language. Stuff like Java is like a object-oriented programming language. You can like they're both Turing-complete languages, which means they can model anything you really want to theoretically. So you can do object-oriented programming in Haskell, just like you can do functional programming in Java if you really want to. It might not be pretty, but it's all doable. And they're talking about using object-oriented programming in the wallet spec. And they also linked to this blog post by Well-Typed, which is a company IOHK contracts out to work on the Cardano SL actually. And in this blog post, they describe how to use object-oriented programming inside Haskell to make some behavior more modifiable than it would be otherwise if you try to do like a simple functional programming. So that's what this pull request is talking about here. And so if like further on, as you see these updates for the new wallet, keep in mind that you will see the design pattern they lay out here. So in this blog post, they essentially introduce a way to design your code to make it more flexible. And if you see the new code in the wallet new, it'll like a lot of it'll try and like match this format from now on, I think, to try and make it more modifiable. So now that we explained that, let's start like a bottom of the chain. Yeah, so they have a new document. So if you go look at the pull request, you can find in the wallet folder, wallet new, they have a wallet layer and a readme. So if you want to like not read the code, you can read this readme. And essentially what they're saying is that there will be multiple kinds of wallets. There's going to be a passive wallet, which doesn't have the diffusion layer. If you're not sure what the diffusion layer is, that is the layer that handles like subscribing to other, like subscribing to the network, receiving updates, this kind of stuff. And so there's going to be a passive layer with like a no diffusion layer and an active wallet, which is like the one people are using right now. So like the wallet everybody's using is like called the active wallet. There's also going to be this passive wallet. And so essentially they are creating a new API, which is like an abstract wallet. And this is kind of like how it works out. This like passive wallet specifies all the operations you can do on a passive wallet, one that cannot spend. And the active wallet is all the passive wallet plus some new features. And they're talking about how to set that up using like some of the stuff that's mentioned in this blog post to make it more extensible. And that's basically it. They also mentioned that there's like going to be 3 concrete implementations of the passive wallet. So there's going to be the legacy 1 kernel, which I'm not sure exactly what it is yet. I'm sure we'll see more about that in the future. And quick check, which as I've mentioned in previous weeks, this is like the tool they're using for like a generating test case and this kind of stuff. So this is like a mocking purposes. If you're not sure what mocking is like a way of testing in computer software. So if you like search up on the internet like a mocking test development, you'll find like some documentation that tells you like how this works and how it's set up. It's actually pretty cool. If you're interested in like a testing code, like this is a very popular idea and a pretty good one. So that's it. That's like what these 2 pull requests are. This is like implement the wallet active layer, and I think this one was like adding the kernel or something like that. Some more work on that, but I'm not sure. There's like no description and no title, so I don't really know. And that's that. So that's what they're talking about here, and saying how it's still in the works. So you can see the pull request, but it's like still something they're working on. They're also talking about how the new wallet, which is the one I just showed you guys, is under testing as a whole, and they're trying to run it on an actual network to see if it works, and they're trying to make progress on that. So right now, I mean, they're saying they have some issues, so there's gonna be some time still. This is not coming out like next week or whatever, but it's nice to know all this refactoring, whatever, seems to be paying off, and they're making work. So that's basically what this is talking about. Yeah, and then they mentioned the certificate changes, how they have a new way to generate the certificates, and you can now have certificates from the command line interface with data wallets as default. If you're curious about the certificate and how this all works, you can go watch my video, I believe last week, where I go through this with you guys. and show you guys like the pull requests and how it's set up and what they mean by dataless wallet. But if you're not interested in like generation of certificates or whatever, which you shouldn't be unless you're trying to like program something, add a new feature to Cardano SL, they don't have to worry about this. Next up, they're talking about end user documentation, and yeah, I think actually this is still the certificates thing. Yeah, and also they're talking about lastly just task to merging remedial work from master develop. That's to say this is a reverse integration. I believe it's called. I forget. Reverse forward. I often get the two confused. But as to say, like whenever you do something in software engineering, you often have like a test branch, which is what you're working on every day, and you have like the master branch, which is only for releases. Every time you make a new release, you put on the master branch. And then sometimes there's a bug you notice in the release version of the code, so you make a patch to the release version of the code, but then you need to like reverse integrate that back into your develop branch, if that makes sense. So if you're interested in like this topic, what exactly it means, if you look up like a forward integration versus backward reverse integration, sorry, you'll see like how this works, how this is set up. Yeah, networking, they spent some time doing some analysis. There's no pull request for anything in here as far as I know, so there's not that much we know about this piece of code. They're just talking about doing some optimization, so I'm sure if they manage to speed up the verification, then we'll see some pull requests related to the speed up in the future. Next up, they're talking about Devops. So they're talking about they released the update previously. They released the Linux beta installer, all this kind of stuff. Improve the CI build sandboxing. They've been having a lot of problems with their continuous integration recently, so that's what they're talking about. Yeah, and they're preparing for a release and the new API and this kind of stuff. The only thing interesting, really, I think in this section, other than the release stuff, the Linux installer or whatever, which people were really looking forward to, is they're talking about how they got funding to put Project Reagan on a cloud resource. If you don't know or don't remember what Project Reagan is, this is the project where they're trying to generate test cases automatically. So if you're interested, I think I went into this more detail in a previous video, and Charles has also like briefly shown on Twitter a few pages of the document on this and how they're using strategies to like programmatically generate test cases that try and find bugs. So it tries to try some test cases and generate more test cases until it finds a bug, and then tries to find like a classification of test cases that cause a bug, this kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that, you can go check it out. Smart contracts, they're saying they're working on it. That's basically all it is. They're saying they're trying to do a roadmap, a plan, and that's basically it. The Yella and K team also just working on stuff, preparing for the internal testnet. And then miscellaneous, the acid alkali paper they've been working on for a while has been progressing still. And they start testing the KCC, which is the K framework, on large AWS servers, so they're trying to do some testing on the cloud. And that's basically it. That's the update for this week. Pretty long, but hopefully you stuck through it, and hopefully it was helpful to you. And as usual, you can find me on Twitter, on YouTube, Patreon, all these kinds of classic platforms. So if you want to see these updates in the future and other content I create, please subscribe, and we'll kind of learn more about Cardano as more gets announced. Thank you.